Should the law be copyrighted? I mean the laws that you and I have to obey, that affect our everyday lives, that affect even the homes we live in. What if a company could copyright the law? And what if you had to pay a license to them to know what the law even is? Well, that's what we have here in ASTM v. UpCodes. And this one has an interesting take on Warhol that might make it be not so bad after all. We'll have to see if the other circuits and SCOTUS end up interpreting it the same way, but we'll get there. But first of all, what the heck is going on? Well, we've got the American Society for Testing and Materials, or ASTM. They create standards for building codes, and then they sell and license their standards as individual documents or by subscription. Sales of ASTM standards account for about 70% of total revenue, so that's a big deal for them. You can see their concern. They are a nonprofit, but even nonprofits have to worry about cash flow. So they make the standards and people can pay the money to see what those are. What's the problem? Well, ASTM standards are frequently incorporated by reference into federal, state, and local law. When a legislature incorporates a standard by reference, it references the standard by name in the text of a law, but does not reproduce the standard's content. Regulated entities may face repercussions for violating a technical standard incorporated by reference, even though the text of the standard cannot be found in the public code. So you've got to follow the law, but it's not there. Where's the law? It's over here, behind a paywall. A law where you will face repercussions if you don't comply with it. Is that fair? Is that the way it's supposed to be? UpCodes says no. They're a for-profit startup, and they provide a searchable online library of building codes, including technical standards that, in UpCodes' view, have been incorporated into law. But UpCodes uses a freemium business model. Even though they're for-profit, any user who makes an account on UpCodes' website can view and copy building codes and incorporated standards for free. UpCodes also offers an optional paid subscription that provides access to bookmarking, annotation, automation, and AI tools. So you just log into them and you can see what the law is for free, like it should have been anyway. So they began publishing copyrighted ASTM standards on its website without securing a license to do so. UpCodes' online library includes 10 copyrighted ASTM standards related to steel and aluminum used in construction. The International Building Code incorporates by reference all 10 works at issue in this appeal, and numerous jurisdictions, including the city of Philadelphia, have adopted the IBC as governing law. The law that people have to follow, that without UpCodes, they'd have to pay money to even learn what it is. So basically what we have here is a finding of fair use, which I think doesn't go far enough. I think if it's in the law, it should be public domain straight out. No fair use, anything, just PD. As soon as it becomes passed into law, PD. But we have a fair use case here. So the Third Circuit says, in Warhol, the Supreme Court emphasized that the first factor, with its focus on purpose, necessarily relates to the justification for the use. Whether a use has a compelling independent justification for copying, like needing to mimic a song to create a parody, is relevant under the first factor, particularly when the original and the copy share the same or highly similar purposes. And that was actually citing Campbell. The district court correctly concluded that UpCodes' use is transformative because it achieves the distinct objective of making the law freely accessible and educating the public on the contents of binding laws. UpCodes' stated mission is to help members of the public access and comply with the laws that govern their built environment. In line with this mission, UpCodes only publishes versions of standards that have been incorporated into law, even if those versions have been superseded by newer versions. Although UpCodes is not a non-profit, it publishes ASTM's works to convey only what the law is, not to inform industry professionals of current best practices. This fundamental distinction renders UpCodes' use transformative. Our conclusion rests not on UpCodes' subjective intent, but on an objective inquiry into what it actually does with the original work. And that was the whole distinction in Warhol with the picture of Prince. Since it was used like a picture of Prince, it still counted. UpCodes' company practices demonstrate that it publishes the works as law, not as technical standards. ASTM asserts that UpCodes' use cannot be transformative because it republishes the works without alteration. This position overlooks the first factor's focus on purpose, not merely expressive similarity. And this is something we hear a lot about. Oh, you can only copy a tiny bit, not the whole thing. Well, it depends on how much is necessary to fulfill that purpose. And you can also see how this concept can also be applied over to the AI cases. Because for AI, they need all of that training data to get it to work, so it's all necessary. So the sheer quantity of it does not speak against the transformative nature of it. To that end, we agree with our sister circuits that a secondary work can be transformative in function or purpose without altering or actually adding to the original work. While a derivative work may be a transformed version of the original, the degree of difference is not sufficient to render it transformative. That was what they said in Warhol. It was still a picture of Prince, so it wasn't transformative. To be sure, both ASTM and UpCodes make the works available to architecture, engineering, and construction professionals interested in compliance. But we are mindful that transformativeness is a matter of degree. We have never held that some overlap in audience or general aim is necessarily fatal to a fair use defense. Our analysis requires going further and examining the copying's more specifically described purposes and character. So again, it might be a little bit transformative, in which case the other factors might kick in and say, no, it's not fair use. Or if it's so transformative that it's a completely different purpose or nature, then that's all you need, and none of the other factors can override it. If it's sufficiently transformative, then it's fair use, end of. UpCodes' use has the capacity to further the goals of copyright, including advancing public knowledge, without diminishing ASTM's incentive to create. UpCodes has a particularly compelling independent justification for copying. It cannot achieve its purpose of disseminating the law without copying the law itself, which, as discussed in more detail under the third factor, includes standards incorporated by reference. These conclusions also counsel in favor of fair use. And they also say that it doesn't matter if it's for profit, because again, you can get them for free. As for the nature of the work, it is fair to say that once the works were incorporated by reference into law, which occurred before UpCodes' copying, they moved even further to the periphery of copyright's core protection. In my view, they should have moved outside it, but that's another case for another time, I guess. ASTM fails to explain why the fact that the works are indirectly incorporated by reference into building codes as opposed to directly should change this outcome. UpCodes reproduced the entirety of the works, which would ordinarily militate against a finding of fair use. But the third factor relates back to the first factor. It will generally weigh in favor of fair use where the amount of copying was tethered to a valid and transformative purpose. So as long as those other factors have hitched their wagon to something transformative, still fair use. Philadelphia and other jurisdictions adopt the IBC as governing law, thereby giving legal effect via indirect incorporation by reference to the entirety of A252. To the extent a similar analysis applies to the rest of the works, which ASTM makes little effort to dispute, UpCodes reasonably copied the entirety of the works. It cannot fulfill its purpose of disseminating the law without copying standards that have been incorporated in full into the law. And again, that means they have to put the whole thing in there. The whole thing is law, so they need to copy the whole thing. it is reasonable for UpCodes to copy non-mandatory portions of a standard incorporated in full, as such portions still have legal effect and may prove integral to understanding the standard's material requirements. A contrary ruling would be blind to the realities of how people interpret and use law. And as far as the effect on the market is concerned, enhanced public access to the law is a clear and significant public benefit. In this context, enhanced access benefits not only regulated entities that must comply with the building code, but also building residents protected by the code, government entities enforcing its requirements, press members reporting on such enforcement, and members of the public who wish to debate or change the law. We've got the right to know what the law is, because if we don't like it, we can go to a town hall meeting or whatever and say, hey, this doesn't make any sense, it needs to be changed, but we can't do that unless we have access to the law, and it's unfair to make us pay for that. On the current record, the likely market harm from UpCodes' copying appears limited. Nonetheless, many important questions remain unanswered, and we view the fourth factor as equivocal. Wimps. 3 of the 4 statutory factors weigh in favor of fair use, and the fourth factor is equivocal. On balance, the factors favor fair use. Which means that ASTM doesn't get a preliminary injunction. And which means they have to think, oh, wait a minute, if it's a law that we all are required to follow, that affects the things we do in the buildings we live in, that should be accessible to us. And that's all UpCodes is doing, so that's fair use. So hopefully that makes this case go away. They didn't say that, they only really said that ASTM fails their motion for a preliminary injunction. But this is a ruling of fair use. This is good. It's ridiculous to say, okay, we're just going to pass this into law. You have to follow it, but we're not going to write it down. You want to just buy it from that company over there. No, that's not how this is supposed to work. Once again, it's just this insane copyright system we find ourselves in, that the very laws that we have to abide by can be copyrighted, can be hidden behind a paywall, and that have to struggle through appeals to get recognized as fair use. Do you see the problem I've been talking about? Do you see what's been motivating me to make all of these videos? Do you see what's been motivating me to stand up for fair use for over 25 years and to oppose the DMCA and everything else that stands in the way of things like this? Are you getting the importance of fair use? It is very, very important, because even in a case where it should obviously be purely public domain, they still have to fight to even get an equivocal fair use finding. It's a sad situation, but it's the way it is. Hopefully things are going to change. Things need to turn around. And I'll be here with you, showing it to you every step of the way, as long as you do your part, which is comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne, like, subscribe, and the bell. And most of all, donate .pagosity.tv, the real thing that keeps me doing this on what should be a lazy Sunday morning, but I really wanted to do this and get it out. Might be Tuesday by the time it gets up, but I'm slipping in the time to do these among everything else I have to do, because I think they're really important. And if you think they're important too, then you can do a one-time donation or become a regular supporter and get all sorts of benefits, such as getting the videos early and ad-free. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.